Topic: The Lighthouse Keeper's Diary. Part 1. The Inheritance, 1,000 to 1,500 words. Ethan Wilde had always felt like an outsider. Despite his successful career as a photographer, the city never felt like home. He had never truly connected with his surroundings, his co-workers, or even the fleeting relationships he'd had over the years. It was as if the world was a series of disconnected moments that never quite aligned. His life was one of routine, one without the complexities of deep emotional ties or a place he could call his own. That was until the letter arrived. It came on a rainy Wednesday morning. Ethan, sitting by the window of his small apartment in the heart of the city, had been absent-mindedly scrolling through his emails when he saw the envelope. Its appearance was starkly different from the usual bills and advertisements. Marked in elegant script, the paper slightly yellowed with age. The return address, just a name and an old town, sent a strange shiver down his spine. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Wilde, you have been named the sole heir to the Wilde family estate. This includes an old lighthouse located on the northern coast of Barnstable. I am writing to inform you of the details regarding your inheritance and the property's history. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to arrange your visit. Yours sincerely, D. Hawthorne, executor of the Wilde estate." The letter was brief, professional, but something about it seemed off. Ethan had never heard of Barnstable, nor did he recall ever being informed of a family connection to a lighthouse. He scanned the letter again, puzzled. His father, who had passed away a few years ago, had never mentioned anything about an inheritance. In fact, the only legacy he had left Ethan was a collection of old photographs and a handful of mementos. Curiosity gnawed at him. The strange inheritance seemed like a fluke, an error perhaps. But deep down, he couldn't shake the thought of the lighthouse. The idea of having something, anything, of his own, far from the sterile city life he had been living, felt almost freeing. He wondered what it might feel like to escape, to leave the confines of his busy life and step into something unfamiliar. The thought of Barnstable, a small town far removed from the buzz of the city, intrigued him. It was as though the universe had finally offered him an opportunity to break free. After weeks of toiling in meaningless photographs, living in a world that had never quite fit, the lighthouse felt like a beckoning light. A place to rediscover himself. A week later, Ethan found himself on a bus traveling to Barnstable. The landscape outside the window was shifting from the industrial sprawl of the city to open roads bordered by trees and rolling hills. The air had a salty edge, and the scent of the sea reached his nostrils even before the coast came into view. Barnstable was a quiet, forgotten town nestled along the northern cliffs, and it seemed that the lighthouse was the only structure left standing on the isolated stretch of coastline. When Ethan arrived, the town's few residents barely took notice of him. They moved like ghosts, wrapped in their own lives, unaffected by his arrival. The only notable building was a faded lighthouse perched on the edge of a steep cliff, its weathered exterior making it appear as though it had been abandoned for decades. The estate agent, a man named Daniel Hawthorne, was a strange, reserved fellow. With his grey eyes and stoic demeanor, he seemed like someone who had witnessed more than he was willing to speak about. He handed Ethan the key to the lighthouse with a brief explanation that the property had been in the Wilde family for generations, though he couldn't explain why it had remained unused for so long. "You're the first person to come here in years," Hawthorne had said, his voice low, as though the words themselves were fragile. "There's a history here, a history I think you should know about, Mr. Wilde." Ethan took the key, feeling a sense of anticipation building inside him. There was something haunting about the way Hawthorne spoke, as though he was trying to keep Ethan from asking too many questions. But curiosity pushed him forward. This was his inheritance now, his responsibility to understand, to make sense of. When he unlocked the door to the lighthouse, the smell of old wood and salt water greeted him. The interior was dim, the only light coming from the narrow windows that lined the stone walls. Dust had settled on every surface, and the air was thick with the passage of time. Ethan stepped cautiously inside, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The first floor was sparse, just a small sitting room with a few chairs, a table covered in dust, and an old fireplace. It felt cold, as if it hadn't been lived in for years. On the walls, faded photographs of previous lighthouse keepers hung, their faces somber and weathered by the years. It was clear that this place had seen better days. He climbed the narrow staircase that led up to the higher levels. At the top, the large, rusted light mechanism still stood, silent and still, as if it had long since ceased its intended purpose. Ethan couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the last keeper, why the lighthouse had been left to decay in isolation. As he explored further, he came across a small room tucked away in the back corner of the lighthouse. There, on a desk cluttered with papers, lay an old leather-bound diary. Its pages yellowed and torn with age. He felt an odd sense of fate as he reached for it, almost as though the diary had been waiting for him. As his fingers traced the leather cover, an unsettling feeling settled in his chest. The diary belonged to the lighthouse keeper, someone who had lived and worked in the lighthouse many years ago. The first entry was dated nearly 50 years ago, written in an elegant hand, though the ink was slightly faded. Ethan couldn't stop himself from reading. The sea has always whispered to me, but there is something else now, something darker in the waves, a presence I cannot explain. The winds speak of it, and the tides bring it closer with each passing day. I fear I am not alone in this place. Ethan's stomach tightened. There was something unsettling about the words. He felt a pull toward the diary, as if it held the key to unraveling some forgotten truth. What had the keeper seen in this isolated place? And what had driven him to write such cryptic words? But as Ethan flipped through the pages, he realized that the diary wasn't just a personal account. It contained warnings. Warnings about strange happenings, about people who had come to the lighthouse seeking refuge, only to disappear without a trace. And then, there were the names. Unfamiliar names, scrawled in the margins, names that seemed to echo from a distant past. Ethan knew that he had uncovered something important, something that no one in the town seemed willing to talk about. As he read on, he realized that the crimes, the disappearances, had never been solved. And the lighthouse keeper, he had been the last to know the truth. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, and Ethan suddenly felt as though the walls were closing in on him. He wasn't sure what he had just stumbled upon, but it was clear that the lighthouse had a story to tell. A story that no one in Barnstable was willing to share.